Title: The Shadows of Black Hollow Road. Chapter 1: The Disappearance. In the fall of 1997, a small, isolated town called Ashford, nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, became the center of an unsolved mystery that haunts the locals to this day. It all started with the disappearance of Emma Sullivan, a college student who had been home for the weekend visiting her family. Emma was last seen driving down Black Hollow Road, her hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, knuckles pale under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Friends later recalled that she'd seemed unusually distant that weekend, her thoughts adrift, as if something weighed heavily on her mind. Witnesses claimed she had been looking over her shoulder more than once, her eyes shadowed with an unspoken fear she never voiced. The last person to see her alive described her face as tense, her jaw clenched, glancing nervously at her rearview mirror, like she was trying to outrun something or someone, a narrow, winding stretch notorious for its dense fog and unnerving silence after sunset. Her car was found 2 days later, abandoned on the roadside with the driver's door ajar. The keys were still in the ignition, and her phone sat untouched on the passenger seat. No signs of struggle, no footprints, just the car, eerily intact, as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. But Emma wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Woods. Locals spoke in hushed tones about Black Hollow Road, often sharing the story of Martha Green, an elderly woman who had lived in Ashford her entire life. Martha recounted an encounter from her youth when she and her brother dared to walk the road after sunset. They laughed off the warnings until they heard footsteps following them, though no one was there. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until her brother turned around only to find a shadow with no face, just hollow eyes gleaming faintly in the dark. They ran, but Martha claimed that for weeks afterward, her brother would wake up screaming, insisting he could still hear the footsteps in his room at night. "You don't escape Black Hollow Road," she'd whisper to anyone who listened. "It just waits until you're alone again," warning travelers not to drive there after dark. They whispered of the Watchers, shadowy figures said to haunt the woods, seen only from the corners of one's eyes. Many dismissed these tales as folklore, but there were too many coincidences to ignore. In the months following Emma's disappearance, more strange reports emerged. Drivers claimed their radios would suddenly emit static, followed by faint voices whispering their names. Some described seeing pale, faceless figures standing along the tree line, vanishing the moment headlights touched them. Others spoke of shadowy shapes darting across the road, just beyond reach. One such story came from Tom Granger, a truck driver who frequently traveled through Ashford. Tom claimed that one foggy night, his truck stalled on Black Hollow Road. As he stepped out to check the engine, he felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. Then he heard a faint whisper calling his name from the woods. When he turned, he saw a figure with hollow, glowing eyes staring back at him. Terrified, he scrambled back into his truck, which miraculously started on its own. Tom never drove that route again. Chapter 3: The Journal. Years later, in 2012, Rachel Adams, an amateur paranormal investigator, became obsessed with the unsolved cases surrounding Black Hollow Road. Determined to uncover the truth, she moved to Ashford and started documenting local stories. During one of her investigations, Rachel discovered an old weathered journal buried beneath the floorboards of an abandoned cabin near the road. The journal belonged to Caleb Moore, a man who had lived in the area in the early 1900s. Caleb's entries detailed his encounters with the shadows, describing them as entities that fed on fear, drawing closer with every secret kept and every lie told. One chilling entry read, "They watch from the trees, their eyes hollow, their whispers cold. They wear the faces of the lost, but do not be fooled. They are not what they seem. I see Emma in the woods, but Emma is gone. What walks now is something else." Rachel felt a growing dread with each page she read, the flickering light from her lantern casting long, twitching shadows across the decaying cabin walls. The air grew colder, dense with an invisible weight that pressed against her chest. She could hear faint creaks from the wooden floorboards, though she was certain she was alone. Outside, the wind whispered through the cracks, carrying with it the faintest echoes of voice-soft, indistinct murmurs that seemed to drift closer the deeper she delved into the journal. Her pulse quickened with every word, each sentence feeling less like a record of the past and more like a warning written just for her, as if something was watching her, even in broad daylight. Chapter 4. The Return to Black Hollow. Against all warnings, Rachel decided to spend a night on Black Hollow Road. Armed with recording equipment, cameras, and her determination, she set up camp near where Emma's car had been found years prior. As night fell, the temperature plummeted unnaturally. Rachel's camera captured strange anomalies, blurry shapes moving in the background, flickers of light with no source. Her audio recorder picked up faint whispers, though she was completely alone. At 3:13 a.m., Rachel's camera recorded her sitting by the campfire, staring into the woods. She suddenly stood up, her expression blank, and walked toward the darkness. Her equipment continued to record for hours, capturing nothing but static and the faintest sound of footsteps fading into the distance. Just moments before her disappearance, Rachel paused, her body stiffening unnaturally as if gripped by an unseen force. The camera captured her head, slowly tilting to one side, eyes wide but unfocused, staring into the darkness beyond the tree line. A faint, guttural whisper echoed through the static, though no one else was there. Her breath became visible in sharp, shallow bursts despite the absence of cold, and her shadow on the ground began to flicker, distorting unnervingly, moving slightly out of sync with her body. Then, without warning, Rachel took a step forward and vanished, her figure swallowed by the darkness as if the night itself had claimed her. Rachel was never seen again. Her gear was found weeks later by hikers, but there were no signs of Rachel anywhere. Chapter 5. The Haunting Evidence. When Rachel's footage was reviewed, viewers noticed something chilling. In the final frames before she vanished, a shadowy figure appeared behind her, its outline barely distinguishable, except for its glowing, hollow eyes. Even more unsettling, the figure seemed to mimic Rachel's movements before she stood and walked away. Audio analysts isolated a whisper from the static. "She's ours now." Since Rachel's disappearance, Black Hollow Road has become a forbidden place. The townsfolk refuse to speak of it, and maps no longer mark its exact location. Yet, urban explorers occasionally venture there, driven by curiosity. Some never return. Those who do report the same things: whispers in the dark, shadowy figures in the woods, and the feeling that something unseen has followed them home. If you ever find yourself on Black Hollow Road, remember this: asterisk, asterisk, don't stop. Don't listen. And whatever you do, don't look back. Because sometimes, it's not just the shadows following you, it's the ones that shouldn't be there. Asterisk, asterisk.